Okay, welcome. Thank you for your patience for the last minute while I figured out where the record button is. We're so glad to have everybody with us today on Election Science Office Hours. This is a webinar and podcast hosted by the Lynn Center for Science, Society, and Policy, also known here at
I don't know
Caltech as the
where.
LCSSP, and it's moderated by me, Michael Alvarez. Our Election Science Office Hours archive has over 30 episodes, which are listed on the Democracy and Elections section of the Lynn Center's website at https://lcssp.caltech.edu. It's on our YouTube channel and on our Spotify and Apple Podcast playlist. In addition, please be sure to follow the LCSSP on social media for the latest updates on our work. We're on LinkedIn, X, Blue Sky, Instagram, and Facebook. Especially Instagram is fun because we'll be posting some little short clips from this, and those are sometimes some of the funnest things that we post on Instagram. For those of you who are live, one last little thing to remind you is if you have a question, please post it in the Q&A area on the Zoom, and we'll do our best to try to get to those as time allows. So today, super excited to have as a guest Kim Alexander, the president and founder of the California Voter Foundation, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization she refounded in 1994 to advance the responsible use of technology in the democratic process and to improve the voting process to better serve the needs and interests of voters. We're going to talk about her long career as a nonpartisan advocate and her specific contributions to California's voting landscape, the evolution of the voter experience in California and beyond, from the early days of the internet to the complex multi-channel systems that we're using in today's elections, literally right now, that are happening in California, and what the future may hold. So let's get right into it. Kim, welcome to the Election Science Office Hours, and thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So, as I said a few minutes ago, as I recall, you took on the reins of the California Voter Foundation in 1994.
Yeah.
What led you to take it on, and what did you have to do to turn it into the really important organization that it is today?
Well, I got involved in the Secretary of State's race back in 1994 and had urged Jackie Spear to run for Secretary of State. And she started a campaign and I got involved with that. And she ended up not running. And I was suddenly a free agent. And there had been this nonprofit that was set up in the Secretary of State's office under March Fong Yu. And Tony Miller was the acting Secretary of State at the time. And he asked me if I wanted to take it on. And I jumped at the chance. I'd long thought about working as a nonprofit director to work on voting issues. And it was a great opportunity. It had a existing temporary 501(c)(3) status. So I had to file for permanent status and get all the other filings in order to bring everything up to snuff, and then went and recruited a board. And honestly, Mike, I thought I would do this for, an election cycle or two. I did not think that it was going to become my entire career, but as things go, one thing leads to another, and it's just always been engaging and fascinating and meaningful, and I just feel really lucky to be able to do this work.
Mm-hmm. And it's an amazing track record that
Yeah.
you've accumulated since 1994. It's just an incredible. As I was preparing for this, looking back at all the things that the California Voter Foundation have done and all the interactions that you and I have had over the years is just really amazing.
Yeah.
And looking back at that track record, so just some specifics: banning paperless voting, paper trails, campaign finance disclosure online, which is a big one that I think some people forget about,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Those were really big and genuine hard policy wins. So, from your perspective, I'm curious which one felt like the longest shot from the inside. What do you think was the biggest win when you look back to 1994 for the CVF?
Well, I think definitely the paper trail fight was huge. And, when I first started working on that issue right after the 2000 presidential election, which I know you remember as well as I do.
Vividly, yes.
Yeah, and in that post punch card voting fiasco environment, there was all this talk about, we need new voting systems, and people started pushing these paperless electronic voting systems, and I was just like, I don't like this. This is not verifiable. We had a longstanding law in California that requires election results that are computed through, computer technology and software has to be verified, and there's no way to independently verify these results. And so I started promoting with my board support, this idea of having voter verified paper ballots and making sure we have meaningful post-election audits, which at the time California was one of only 4 states that had that kind of a law. And, the first couple years working on it were really lonely. I mean, there were not a lot of other people who shared my view, and there was a lot of pressure in the industry to buy this equipment, and a lot of our counties did start buying it, even though it wasn't certified, and or if it was tested, it was to really old standards. And so yeah, I spent 2 years, pushing that rock up the hill and not getting very far. And then at the end of 2002, excuse me, Professor David Dill from Stanford contacted me and said, "Hey, I think this paperless electronic voting is really a problem, and I've been told I should talk to you about it." And I was like, "Great." I was like, "Wow, we finally have somebody who shares this view, and not only just somebody, but a Stanford computer science professor. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that." So turned out he knew one of my board members, who David Jefferson. We all served on the Internet Voting Task Force together. And David, I was having a hard time convincing him that we needed a paper trail. And so David talked to each other. And pretty soon after that, David Jefferson calls me up and says, "I get it, let's do this." And by January 2003, the three of us were sitting on a new Secretary of State task force on touchscreen voting. And I spent that entire year convincing Kevin Shelley, who was our Secretary of State at that time, that he should mandate voter verified paper trails in California, because he had the ability to do that as Secretary of State. He could do that by fiat. And he did do that in November 2003. I'll never forget it. And it was just a turning point in the whole battle for this. And, there were a lot of, as you remember, a lot of advocates also promoting this technology because it is accessible and it does provide resources for voters with disabilities. And so, we had to come up with, an answer other than just, touchscreen voting is bad, but instead, what is the solution? And that's where we came up with okay, you need a printer, you need a record the voter can independently verify. And it was clunky at the beginning, but once California mandated it, and then we had some additional technology fiascos, which certainly helped our cause. It was enacted into law by 2004, and by 2006, 40,000 paperless electronic touchscreen voting machines in the state had either been replaced or with paper systems or retrofitted with printers. And so I think it was pretty remarkable. It only took 3 years once we got the right folks on board. It really only took 3 years to get it done. And people thought I was crazy at the time early on, Mike. They were like, every metaphor, that train has left the station, that horse has left the barn. This is and we did turn it around, and now almost the entire country votes on paper ballots. So I feel like, and one of the reasons we did it was because we are California. We do have this impact, and once our Secretary of State endorsed it, others did. News organizations did, the LA Times, the New York Times, just dominoes started to fall. So it was really exciting to see that turnaround happen.
Mhm. Yeah, that was a big win for you all at the time. And there was a lot going on too. I mean, we just have to remember that that was the time when all of the reforms for HAVA were being implemented.
Yeah.
Big changes throughout California. HAVA really mandated many changes in California, and that was one that I don't think we foresaw in the when HAVA passed, and it became really important, right? As the country started to make the transition to these electronic voting systems, especially from punch cards. So, congrats on that big win.
Well, thank you. And of course, now we have primarily paper-based systems because we're
Mhm.
voting by mail, and now we have new challenges. This is why,
Right.
the work never ends. So,
Well, yeah, yeah.
um,
That's the exciting thing about working in elections, right? It's like
yeah,
it never ends. I mean, there's always something new. So talking about everybody voting on paper, and like 80 some percent of ballots probably in these elections we're having this year are going to be returned in California by mail. Um, but back in the 90s, we both served on this Secretary of State Internet Voting Task Force that you just mentioned.
yeah,
And I think that, as I recall, you, like me, were originally open to the idea of voting online. But we both came out at the end, kind of the other side and being opposed to it. So Let's talk a little bit about kind of what you learned during that process and how you changed your mind about the prospects of internet voting in California.
Yeah, I mean that's a great question because you're absolutely right, Mike. I mean, I did start out being sort of casually interested in online voting and thinking like, oh yeah, that's just something that's inevitably going to happen. You know, I got involved with CVF and the internet at a time when the internet was just coming into our lives. And that was another part of why I took on this opportunity because I could see that this new change was coming and I wanted to be a part of it. And I wanted California to be a part of it. And I wanted us to take things in a positive direction for voters and not go backwards. And so what I realized by the time we were on that task force together in 1999 was that while I knew a few things about the internet and voting, I didn't know anything about election administration. I didn't know anything about election security. I took all these things for granted. It's like the sausage making factory that you don't want to look at. And that task force, we really had to start looking at it. And that really opened my eyes up to number one, the incredibly difficult job that election officials have keeping these systems running and operating in a secure and accurate way that gives voters confidence. I mean, that is just a huge, huge job that everybody takes for granted.
Mhm.
And number two, there's so much technology involved now in voting that is not always kept up to date with the latest security issues. I mean, we update our voting systems every 10 or even 20 years sometimes, and the technology changes a lot faster than that. And I went from being a casual supporter of the idea of online voting to an ardent opponent, and I'm still an ardent opponent because there's primarily a couple of reasons. Number one is the people say, "Oh, I can shop online, I can bank online. Why can't I vote online?" Banks lose millions of dollars to fraud online every year. So, yes, you can do those things, but it comes at a cost for the institution. And I don't think we can just say, "Oh, we're okay if we lose millions of votes to hackers." Also, the ballot is unlike any other transaction. It's secret and it has to be secret from the person that you're giving it to. You don't want election officials to be able to say, "Oh, thanks, Mike, for your ballot. We see you voted for so and so, and we're confirming that back to you." Unlike a banking transaction or other transactions. So I don't think people realize how tricky that is to affect, especially if you're doing it online. You have to credential the person voting. You have to authenticate they are who they say they are. You have to make sure they're voting their own ballot. You have to make sure they're voting for themselves and not somebody else. You have to make sure that they have confidence that the ballot they sent over the internet is identical to the one you're receiving on the other end. And you have to be able to verify that vote and have it be part of a post-election audit that's transparent and publicly accessible. And I have not seen anybody produce that yet. And even if you could, the reality is that our elections offices, while some are very sophisticated technologically, many are not. And the people who think this is a great solution are not nearly familiar enough with the reality on the ground of what happens in US election administration. So I think that people can keep trying and they will and they do and they are. And I just put a really high bar on this. I know that there are some efforts to allow it for military and overseas voters, but we've done a lot in California to use the technology to provide those opportunities to vote without going so far as transmitting ballots over the internet. And I think that's a line we should keep holding. Because you know what? If we start transmitting ballots over the internet or over our phones, yes, we could make it a lot more convenient for people to vote. And, but the reality is that we also would make our elections much more hackable and much more susceptible to fraud. And at what cost do we do that? If you start allowing insecure voting systems to be used, then what incentive is anybody going to have to vote? Nobody's going to have confidence their vote is going to matter. This is not American Idol. This is American democracy. And we need to make sure that the voting systems that we're using give voters confidence and make sure people have the incentive to continue to vote.
I agree, and I think it's really interesting that you put your finger on two things, and they were both important for me at the time because if you roll back and think back to the late '90s, I mean, it was kind of a heady time. It was the internet
Yeah.
was taking off, social media was just happening, and there was just so much optimism about how the internet might positively change the world and how social media might
Yeah.
positively change the world. I was trying to explain this the other day to some young people, just like how at the time we were all so optimistic and how we became so jaded, right, about the technology. But I think part of it here, just at this point in that moment in time, For me, it was also a great eye opener to really understand the complexity of election administration. And the security part of it, right, just was much more complicated. Even, even taking out the internet, right, just talking about how they secure elections now or then
Yeah.
was so complicated and so important. And again, as you try to extrapolate that to the internet, it just seemed like a impossible task then, and I think it's even more impossible in today's world.
Yeah.
So I want to
Agree.
talk about another security issue, kind of another threat has kind of been added to the threat matrix of elections, which is that the physical threats, right, that we see to election workers, and this incredible misinformation environment that we're both experiencing and both trying to deal with when it comes to elections. I think that they're deeply connected, that I think one kind of feeds into the other, and they lead to this kind of spiral of more misinformation and more threats and unfortunately violence. Is that how you see it, or are they in some ways separable, and can we try to deal with them as separable problems?
Well, I mean, there's definitely a rise of political violence in general in this country, and that's been going on for, the past decade or so. But I think what's happening with election officials is unique, and their staff, they are the frontline workers of democracy. And when there are questions about the integrity of the elections, they're the ones that have to deal with the public blowback on that. And so this is one of the reasons why the California Voter Foundation has been working to accelerate the vote count, because we can see that the greatest opportunity for mis and disinformation to spread and the greatest opportunity for blame to be laid on local election officials who are just carrying out state laws and doing their job is in that window of time post-election, where you've got people impatient wanting results. You've got, races flipping from one party to another, raising suspicions. And you've got, people actively sowing mis and disinformation, not just at home, but foreign
Mhm.
actors abroad that are our enemies that want to undermine voter confidence. So we have a lot of risk factors out there. And I got involved in the issue of accelerating the vote count in part because of this, because I want to see less pressure put on our election officials in that window of time. We saw in November 2024, you may remember, there were uh, 29 bomb threats leveled against county election offices across the state the Friday after the
Mhm.
election. And that not only disrupted vote counting, but it really shook the registrars. I just met with one of them, Maria Valadez in Lake County recently, and I asked her about that, and she said, "Oh yeah, we got one of those, and we called the sheriff, and they came in and they looked around, not even with the dog or anything, and we're like, okay, everything's fine." And I just can't imagine what it would be like, trying to get the job done, trying to get your votes counted, and you have that kind of thing happen. So I think that shortening that ballot counting window, which is not about the registrars and their staff as much as it's about the laws that we
Mhm.
we have governing the state's ballot counting process, I think would help with some of those safety concerns. Our own board chair, Kathy Darling Allen, I know you know Kathy.
Mhm.
She literally had to retire as registrar of voters for Shasta County because it was it was unhealthy, unsafe for her to continue because of heart problems that the stress from that job gave her. And there are a lot of registrars out there like that, people who have had to leave the job because of threats to their family, stress for their family, feeling like it's just not worth it. And that's one of the things that really concerns me, is that we rely on this, amazing army of people across the country to run our elections. And for the most part, with few exceptions, they are overworked, underpaid, understaffed, under attack, and
Mhm.
underappreciated. And I feel like that is why we need to pay attention to the funding issues, pay attention to the safety issues, recognize that they are not clerks, they're
Mhm.
technologists doing a very technologically intensive job. Pay them for that. I think that we really run the risk of seeing even more departures from people who are veterans in this field, and we've relied on to
Mhm.
keep our elections secure. And there's wonderful new people coming in, and they're getting trained and they're getting support, but there's nothing like 20 years of experience, as in at your job, being able to do it better than others might be able to.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a real problem. And the thing I'd like to do though is I want to unpack the ballot counting, the length of time it takes in California a little bit,
Yeah.
because you've probably thought more deeply about this than pretty much anybody I know. So you
Well,
described it
yeah,
well. I think you have. Okay.
okay.
And I mean, I've thought about it a bit, and we've written some research papers on it, but not in the sense of we're just focused more on the scriptive, like what's going on, right?
Yeah.
Not how do we fix it, right? And I think
Yeah.
in particular on how do we fix it, you've really thought pretty deeply about it. You described it as pig in the python, which I think is a
Hmm.
great term for describing how California's counting process works and how complicated it is. Can we start by talking about what the real bottlenecks are right now that make California so much slower to count ballots than other states?
Yeah, and I think before I do that, I want to sort of distinguish between two timelines. One
Mhm.
is how much time does it take to count all the ballots? And we give our counties 30 days to do that. And the other is
Mhm.
how long does it take for the Associated Press or other news desks to call races? And
Mhm.
you don't have to wait for all the ballots to be counted. So when people talk about it, being slower, they're really talking about the latter. They're talking about not
Mhm.
having outcomes be decided. AP is very good at figuring out, whether a race stands a chance of changing or not after X number of ballots have been counted. So I just want to make that clear distinction. But the big reason what's happening is that we have this pig in the python, which is the voters who are returning their vote by mail ballots, yes, by mail, but increasingly through drop boxes and at voting sites in envelopes on election day. And that
Mhm.
accounts for as much as 25% of all the ballots that are cast as vote by mail ballots in any given county, and they cannot process those ballots until after the election. And they can't do anything else but process those ballots
Mhm.
after the election, although many of them get other things going at the same time. So it's this mountain of ballots. And I can't even imagine, if you're an election official and just put on an in-person election, which all of our counties do. Unlike other states that are all vote by mail, we still are standing up voting sites for voters. And so they're going through all of that work, and then they get through that, and now they've got another in LA County's case, million ballots they had to
Mhm.
process post election day. So the problem there, I really believe, is voter behavior. That's one way to address that. And we're urging voters this election and trying to get funding in the budget to
Mhm.
provide $35 million for a statewide voter education campaign to urge voters to turn their ballots in just a little earlier, not 3 weeks early. You still can take your time, but getting your ballot in the Saturday before the election, if you're dropping it off, or mailing it a week before, would make a big difference. And then we also have this new option that is sometimes called sign, scan, and go, where you can take your completed vote by mail ballot to a voting site, check in and sign the roster as an in-person voter, and then cast that ballot as an in-person ballot and even get it scanned and counted on the spot. And that is a benefit for the voter. They don't have to wonder whether their signature is going to be verified or not. And it saves the
Mhm.
elections office a bunch of steps in ballot processing. They don't have to verify that signature. They don't have to open the envelope. They don't have to extract the ballot. They don't have to check it to see if it's going to scan, if you can get it scanned on site. So we're promoting that option, which is available in all county election offices the
Mhm.
Saturday before the election. And that's one way that I think that we can bring it down. But basically, the big picture change is that we have two things that have happened. We've shifted primarily to vote by mail,
Mhm.
and we have more competitive contests now, especially for Congress. And so we are having a harder and harder time getting enough ballots across the counting line to get a significant enough percentage counted for AP and other observers to call elections. And that has, as a result, delayed the ability of AP and other news organizations to call the outcome of the contest for the House of Representatives, because it also has become a close contest in recent years, and they're waiting on us. So that brings all this ire and grief on California from not just in this country, but all over the world. People are
Mhm.
humiliating us over this. And I spent years defending and explaining why it takes so long to process our ballots. And finally, around 2022, we were like, let's see if we can figure out a way to
Right.
to do this better. And then we've been working on it ever since.
Mhm. So on one part of the voter education issue, maybe you can help me out here because I get this question a lot, which is I oftentimes try to encourage people to return their by mail ballots early, like the week before, by dropping it off at a drop box or taking it to an early vote center or something like that. And a lot of times they'll say, well, but things happen in the last week of the election. I mean, think back to the gubernatorial recall election in 2003 when last minute scandals broke, or my I grew up in Minnesota and went to Carleton College, and my college mentor Paul Wellstone, who was a senator eventually, was killed in a plane crash right a few days before the election there. So people bring that up,
Yeah.
and so how should I respond to that?
They can vote in person on election day. I mean, everybody has that option. And again, I get that too. I don't want
Mhm.
anybody to feel like their vote was wasted. I've heard that from people who voted too early in a presidential primary. Um, so, hold on to your ballot. I mean, you can, as I said, I think the Saturday before the election is a sweet spot. And I think part of the problem is that people want something to do on election day. So they're like, oh, I'm gonna turn in my ballot on election day. And they're part of the problem. I hate to say it, but they are the pig in the python. And so even if just some of those people could instead, get their ballot in a couple days early, let their county get a jump on processing it before the election and do something else on election day, wear your I voted sticker, take somebody else to vote, post on social media. Like there's a million other things you could do on
Mhm.
election day besides turn in your vote by mail ballot at a drop box. And of course, and if that's what you're going to do it. Like we don't want to discourage anybody from voting however they need to. But for people who are, who want to see a faster count, want to see
Mhm.
your results in the count on election night, you can do that by getting your ballot in just a couple days earlier
Mhm.
or voting in person on election day.
Okay, good. That's good advice. I'm going to be using that one because I know I get
Right.
that question constantly when I tell people get those ballots in early.
Yeah. Well,
So
especially now with this gubernatorial primary that we're having. I mean, I totally get it. So people are going to want to wait a little bit before
yeah, I
they
think
cast
so
that
because
ballot.
yeah, it's really uncertain what's gonna happen on both sides.
Yeah.
Now, there is a lot of progress that's being made on counting speed. As I was preparing for this, I counted up at least five separate bills that have gone through the legislature.
Yeah.
AB 5, AB 827,
Yeah.
AB 1072, AB 2249, and Senate Bill 3. So things
Yeah.
are changing, okay? So I think that means that there's lots of different places where we need reform, right, to speed up the counting process in California. So can you walk through what the moving parts are here? Like what actually is changing? What is the legislature doing to address this problem?
Yeah, I mean, those were all bills that we supported last year. One of them, AB 1249, is one that was sponsored by the Secretary of State that I'm most excited about because it requires all counties, not just Voters Choice Act counties, to offer Saturday voting to voters. And we think that can really help voters get a
Mhm.
jump on voting and also make voting more accessible for people that want to vote in person and can't do it on a Tuesday. Um, the other bills that you mentioned, AB 5 is a bill that requires counties to count most of their ballots within 13 days.
Mhm.
AB 827 is a bill that establishes a 22-day ballot curing window for ballot signatures. That's shorter than it was in prior elections, but still really long in my view.
Mhm.
And then the other bills that you mentioned are, meant to help voters avoid making mistakes, get their signature right. I mean, they're really on the margins. If we want to see change in this area, there's a couple of things that we have to do. Number one, we have to give the counties money and not just one-time money, but ongoing money, because this is just ridiculous. Elections are this huge unfunded federal and state mandate on the backs of local governments. And some counties find ways to get the resources that they need, and others really struggle. And that means that voters are not enjoying equal voting opportunities in our state. So, we keep pushing for money in the budget to support the counties, but especially to comply right now with AB 5 to meet that 13-day deadline. They could really benefit from having a ballot sorting machine or an additional ballot sorting machine or having more scanners or more high-speed scanners or getting e-poll books. And there's all kinds of tools out there that the counties could use. The other area where they really need some help with is staffing. Again, that is a resource issue, a
Mhm.
funding issue. And a lot of their facilities are needing updating, and a lot of them are working out of government buildings that were built 60 or 70 years ago, and they were not built for processing vote by mail ballots in a transparent way that the public can observe. So I do think that we need to consider a couple of big ticket items. One is maybe a new bond act like we had in after the 2000 election. That would be a capital campaign for counties to create new election administration sites for their registrars of voters that are modern and transparent and accessible, and make sure they have all the equipment that they need and the tools and the security. The other is considering changing the certification timeline. I mean, right now it is 30 days, and it's been that long, about that long for a long time. But again, what's changed is when races are getting called that people are getting impatient about. And so I do think that if you shortened it by a week, it would allow races to be called more quickly. It would bring us in line with other states like Colorado that have a 23, 22, 23 days certification timeline. And it would most importantly enable counties to potentially be able to certify their election results before Thanksgiving, which is what they really want to do. They and their staff want to enjoy Thanksgiving too.
Right.
And so I think that we need to consider, a flexible certification timeline that would let counties certify as soon as 15 days after election, as long as 23 days. And we would have to shorten the ballot curing window from 22 days to 14 days. That may be hard to do because people have gotten used to having that big window to go out and do curing campaigns and close contests. But I think that there are other factors here, especially voter confidence, that we really need to consider, which we know is eroding. This is not an issue that is just about the president and his colleagues criticizing California. There is a real undermining of voter confidence happening because of our long vote count. And we need our political leaders to acknowledge that, invest the money to address that, provide the guidance and the rules and the laws to the counties to do something about it. The counties, I think, are very frustrated that again they get blamed for this, but they're working within the framework that the legislature has provided them and working with the resources that they have and have not been provided. So this is a partnership between local government and state government, and we need the governor and the legislature and the secretary of state to get on board with making sure the counties have the resources and the timeline that they need to do the job to everyone's satisfaction.
Okay, so to summarize, what you really want to happen is you want the legislature to change the rules to shorten the amount of time that the election officials have to both count ballots and like AB5, right? And then
Yeah.
to certify. But you want to provide you want the legislature also to provide more resources, right?
Yes, we want both. We're
Yeah,
just
one part.
starting to circulate this timeline idea for
Mhm,
shortening the certification window. So we're just, we're looking for input on that. I don't know what the right numbers are. I have ideas, but
mhm,
we're starting to circulate that. But we do have, the budget's underway right now, and we have a budget request that we've been circulating, as I mentioned, $35 million. Assemblymember Gail Pellerin, former Santa Cruz County Registrar of Voter, who you might want to bring on your show at some time. She'd be
mhm.
awesome.
Yeah.
She is the chair of the Assembly Elections Committee, and she is championing this $35 million budget ask to urge voters to vote early and make sure they're aware of the election security procedures that we have in our state. And then the other ask is we've been suggesting 55 million in the budget to go to the counties to acquire the equipment, staff, and space that they could use to help comply with the AB5 13-day
Mhm.
counting timeline. And I have heard that the budget numbers have come in very positively and that we have a very flush budget. And so are looking up from where we were in January. And I'm hopeful that we will get that support after the May revise and before the budget is put to bed in June.
So those two infusions of 35 million and then it sounded like 50 million, are those ongoing or one time?
Uh, they they are one time. So it's not the ideal solution. It's really hard to get ongoing funding
Right.
put into the state budget, and it's going to take a lot of people to make that happen. We used to have the mandates funded, and Governor Jerry Brown removed that funding back in 2011, and it's never been restored. And
Mhm.
yet the legislature keeps enacting new election mandates that the counties have to comply with without funding being provided. And everybody knows the mandates reimbursement process is broken.
Mhm.
So it's very disingenuous. I think that we really need, I just look at all of the things that we've done in the last 10 years or so to improve voter participation, which are all great changes, same day voter registration, the ability to vote anywhere in your county through the Voters' Choice Act, the ability to vote on Saturdays, free postage. We have all these great innovations, but they need to be backed up with the resources to make them real for all the voters in the state.
Yeah, one thing I keep telling people, and luckily since we live in LA County, it's easy for me to tell people to do this. But go down and see what you can do with an infusion of resources like that by going and visiting the LA County ballot processing facility. I mean,
Yeah,
it's an amazing facility. It's built with transparency in mind. It's
yeah,
built so that people like me or you or my students or anybody can actually go and see the whole process happening. And
yeah.
I think it's a great example for what these kind of infusions, these numbers sound big. These things are expensive, but they're really important for democracy and for transparency.
Absolutely. And both LA and Orange County have made huge
Mhm.
improvements in their ballot processing facilities with their Board of Supervisors support. I mean, that's who provided that funding. And we have seen in our analysis that we're doing of ballot counting speed in the counties that those investments have paid off.
Mhm.
We've seen, LA County, both LA County and Orange County rapidly improve their ballot processing thanks to those improvements. So we've also seen Placer County, which has implemented the sign, scan, and go voting, shave off 3.5 days from their ballot processing by getting voters to turn in their ballots as in-person ballots rather than as mail-in ballots.
Mhm.
So there are some real hard, we're getting some of those numbers together to help show that these enhancements can really make a difference. And one of the really great things that Dean Logan and his team did in LA County was they brought on a team of engineering experts from Rhode Island, Gretchen
Mhm.
Mocht and her
Yep.
crew, to help them re-envision their
Mhm.
process. And that's the kind of thing other counties could really benefit from as well, is having an outsider bring this an engineering eye to the ballot processing systems in the counties.
Yeah, it's a great shout out to Gretchen. I've had her on the
Yeah,
show before and
good.
really look forward and enjoy collaborating with her and working with her. And yeah, I think that having that independent set of eyes and thinking about it outside the box is really important.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, one of the things that I when I tell my students in particular why it takes so long in California, one of the issues is ballot curing, right?
Yeah,
Signature curing. And again, I think what you're trying to focus on with talking about sign and scan and go is basically a process that obviates the need for ballot curing, right? Um,
right.
but you're also pushing for other reforms in the process, including a text-based signature curing process. Can we talk a little bit about like exactly why that's such a problem, why it takes so long to cure these signatures, and again, what are some of the things other than sign, scan, and go that might eliminate the need for waiting so long after the election to get final results?
Yeah. Well, on your latter question, I mean, we now have gerrymandered political districts, so we may not have to wait as long as we did when we had, I mean, we had
Sure.
races in the last election that were decided by, 0.1, 0.2%. So we may see wider margins, although I think in the primary, we may see some really
Hmm.
tight races to figure out who the top two are in some of these contests. So we may have some really long vote counts.
Right.
But signature curing, and just like the vote by mail ballot grace period, these were things that CVF pushed for because we were seeing the byproduct of vote by mail and this growing ballot rejection issue, which reached almost 3% when we studied this issue back in 2020. Was almost 3% of all the vote by mail ballots cast in the June 2014 primary were rejected.
Hmm.
And, to me, there's nothing more disappointing. The only thing to me more disappointing than somebody not voting is somebody trying to vote, filling
Hmm.
out their ballot, getting it in, and then having it be rejected. I mean, that is not the voting experience we want people to have. And the truth is that the voters who have the hardest time with signatures on their envelopes are our youngest voters. So they're first time voters. And I certainly don't want people to have that kind of experience as their first time voting. Um, so, we pushed for this, and we along with the ACLU and other groups, you know, wanted these laws, and they do protect voters. If you sign your envelope, or you forget to sign your envelope, or you sign it in a way that doesn't look like your voter registration signature, then the county contacts you and asks you to provide a new signature. And it has to sufficiently match the voter's registration signature on file. And what's happening is, as more and more people are registering online through their DMV signature, is the one that's appended to their voter registration record, and that one is made on a little screen, using a stylus. And so
Mhm.
it doesn't look like the wet signature on the voter's envelope, and that's why they're not matching. And so the great thing about this text-based curing solution is that you use your phone to create your signature, and
Mhm.
it will look more like the one that's at
Mhm.
the DMV that's appended to your voter file. So it's been this text-based curing works
Mhm.
where the voter, so the every voter who has a signature issue is notified by their county election office through the mail and told, hey, we had a problem with your signature. These are the things you can do to cure it. And they can fill out a form and sign it and mail it back. They can fax it back. They can bring it in person. In some counties, LA County being one of them, you can use your smartphone to scan a QR code, go
Mhm.
into a portal, validate yourself through some personally identifiable information that matches your voter registration record, and use your smartphone to create a signature that you can then upload and send to your county
Mhm.
so that your ballot can be counted. And that can be done immediately. So instead of the voter having to mail something back, which again, young people not only are not great at using making signatures, they're also not great at using the mail.
Right. Right.
So, we want to give them a technology that may be more comfortable for them and can allow for immediate curing. And this is something that the whole state of Colorado is doing.
Mhm.
Nevada is doing. We have several counties. Contra Costa is offering it. San Joaquin. So we have a bill we're sponsoring with the Protect Democracy, authored
Mhm.
by Mark Berman, Assembly Bill 2604, that would require all counties to provide this option for
Mhm.
voters with assistance from the Secretary of State.
Well, that's fascinating, and I'm going to have to look at some of these counties and see exactly what they're doing, and maybe it might even be possible to get some information from them about how that is facilitating, the speed, right, of
Yeah.
counting under these kind of systems. Now we've been on for almost 45 minutes, and I think you and I could keep going for hours. But I wanted to ask you well, actually two kind of final questions. One
Yeah.
is that you and I have been in this business for over 3 decades. And I have to tell you, Kim, one of the things that I really think is amazing about you is that you are always so optimistic and upbeat, right? No matter what's going on, no matter what the issues are, and you still are after 30 years. So what gives you this seems like unbounded optimism about where California elections are heading?
Oh, well, I mean, pulling back, looking at things from, 20,000 feet above perspective, I mean, I'm just incredibly grateful to be a Californian, to live in the United States.
Mhm.
I mean, we live in the greatest state in one of the greatest countries in the world. And we have enormous freedom in California, especially as a woman. I mean, I've traveled around the world, and it's really made me appreciate as a woman how lucky I am to live in this state and not elsewhere. And we have a lot of voting rights in our state. And we have a lot of elections.
Mhm.
And I view elections as the bright line between, civility and chaos. I mean, it's
Mhm.
what keeps us safe, really. And I've been involved in elections my whole life. My dad was on the city council in Culver City, where I grew up, and so I've had elections in my life. And um, yeah, it's hard for me to imagine not doing this. And I think that what keeps me optimistic really are the people I get to work with. I mean, one thing I made this joke a lot during the pandemic that the coronavirus bug will come and go, but when you catch the election bug, you have it for life. And I think that that's true, of a lot of us. I
Yeah.
see, election officials who left their job under stress, but they stay in the field. They're still
Mhm.
consulting, or they're working for nonprofits, or, other agencies. Um, and those are the people, that really keep me at it, because there are so many other people who are like us that really care. and believe in what we're doing. And yeah, it's challenging. I mean, I won't lie, this environment we're working in right now is not anything that I ever anticipated, but I have an amazing board of directors and I have amazing colleagues and friends and consultants and people who I work with, and that's really what keeps me going. It keeps me positive.
Yeah, similarly, every time I get kind of disenchanted and upset about how things are going, it's always the people who, I kind of return to, and many of them who reach out and say, I got a question, I need you to do something for me, or, can you take a look at this? And there's just so
Yeah,
many really fascinating and interesting and involved people, including yourself, who
thank
make
you.
this a really, really fun environment to work in, despite the challenges.
I mean, so what else do you think keeps you engaged in all of this? You've been at it for so long. Are there any other things
Well,
that we can?
well, I
Yeah,
have to tell you, the thing that's fun about my job is that, every year I get, a fresh crop,
yeah,
of Caltech students, right? Who
that is.
they want to be educated about this, they want to learn about this, they want to be involved. And,
Hmm.
some of them are grad students, most of them are undergraduates. And that it's the energy and the enthusiasm and the excitement that they bring to it. Every time I need
Yeah,
to teach a class in elections, I'm going to teach a class this fall on the midterm election. And I'm going to take them down to that facility that we talked about, like Dean's facility,
awesome.
and do things like that. And they have interesting questions and great ideas, and they're just excited. And that to me is always kind of my touchstone,
Yeah, I could
as
see
well
that.
as people, like you and Dean and Bob Page and Secretary of State, all these people who keep reaching out and saying, "Hey, we've got problems. Can you help us answer them?" And that
Yeah.
always is also invigorating too.
Yeah, there are a lot of amazing people working in this field, and it's
Mhm.
not easy. We're all struggling, and I think the hardest thing is that there's always another election coming, and you can't stop it. Like it's coming whether you're ready or not. And so I think that does add a lot of pressure to those of us who work in elections. But it's also what makes it exciting, I
Mhm.
think.
So to close, I know you do one other very interesting thing about elections. So can you tell us about your musical efforts to educate voters, like your proposition songs? I'm not going to ask you to perform one, but maybe
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that and why that's an important part of what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, I guess, I want to back up and just say that I think elections should be fun. Like
Mhm.
I think, and there's a lot of heaviness around elections. So, we had this idea back in 2002, I think, or 2000, we did the first one. We had 20 propositions on the ballot, and I was talking to a friend about it, and I'm like, I don't know how the voters are going to sort this out. This is crazy. And she's like, yeah, we need a jingle or something. And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. So that was the first proposition song, and I recruited some friends to record it with me. We recorded it at Capitol Public Radio Studios, and it just took off. It was a hit, as they say. I
Mhm.
mean, people were really into it, and I think it was on NBC National News. I mean, it was a very unique project, and so that was fun. And then we had the paper trail fight, and that kept me busy for a couple years. Then we did some more after 2006, and I don't do it every year, but I have enough material. I could probably release a record or something at some point here.
Yeah.
But the last
Put it
one
on
I
file.
wrote was for the 2024 election. It was called Democracy Aisle, and it was
Uh-huh.
to the tune of Gilligan's Isle. And you can find these on our website. And it
Uh-huh.
is basically a song to help boost voter confidence, explaining how things are different in the states, but there are some things that are all the same, that people have the same rights to, vote free of coercion and the secret ballot. And so it's a really cute, fun song that other people can play too. But I love playing music. I have a radio show on KVMR. I
Mhm.
play in music jams and go to music festivals. So it's really fun when I can blend, that passion with my love for democracy and elections.
Yeah, I actually stumbled upon a few of these preparing for this. I did not know about this part of you and your work. Thought that the ones I listened to were great. And again, yeah, you need to put it on vinyl. Yeah, just imagine the vinyl record, like with the California flag on it. I mean, it could be a lot of fun. But
Yeah, I'll get right on that, Mike.
you have infinite time. So is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you wanted to mention?
Well, in your questions, things you wanted to ask me about, you asked me, what is something you want people to know about elections that
Hmm.
they don't know. And I was thinking about that, and I have been often use this metaphor, which I think that, ballots are like money,
Hmm.
they have value because we believe they have value.
Hmm.
And I think it's really important that we remember that. January 6th was a really bad day in this country. And I remember feeling that day like
Hmm.
this is a house of cards that could just topple because this is all built on confidence at the end of the day. We have laws and we have procedures and we have courts, but people need to believe that their vote matters in order for us to be having meaningful elections. So I hope people will keep that in mind, that we all need to do what we can do to keep the system strong, to support our local election officials, to tell our lawmakers to support them with funding and resources, to volunteer and work in the polls, to stop in on election hero day and support your local folks then, because this is what keeps us safe. These ballots are what keep us safe and free, and that's why I do what I do. And I hope that we can get through this next election with confidence and successfully, and that we get on the other side, that people will feel that it was reliable and meaningful.
Well, that is a fantastic way to end. And
Thanks.
I'm with you on that. And I really appreciate your time today. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks. It's been great, Mike. I really appreciate it.